Every day was the same. 5 minutes before the children came out of school, the old Volvo would appear. It never came close and the driver never got out of the car. As the days went by, other parents started to notice. When one of Mom's arrived late and saw the driver using binoculars, she called the police. The patrol car arrived just as the children came out. I was bending down to embrace Madeline and Thomas when I saw him get out of the car. Even 400 yards away, I recognized him. That large frame, the way he held himself, even the way he pushed his fingers through his hair when he was stressed. I watched as he got something from his pocket and showed it to the constable. "Mummy, why are you crying?" asked Thomas. "Are you hurt?" "No, don't worry." Mummy's fine. The wind just blew some grit in her eye. I lied to him. As I gathered them up and walked back to the car, I looked back to see him, still talking to the policeman. 2 days later, I went in my friend Penny's Isuzu. Penny went to collect the children with specific instructions to keep them waiting at the gate. It took him all of 5 minutes. At first, he was tentative, looking all around, and then walking purposefully towards them. He was 100 yards away when they noticed him. With the window wound down, I could hear the shout as Madeline saw him. "Daddy!" she cried as she ran towards him. Thomas pulled away from Penny and followed her. He went down onto one knee and gathered them both in a tight embrace. I watched with tears running down my cheeks as he held them, then got up and slowly walked them back to the gate. He crouched down to talk to them, looking up to address Penny. I got out of the car and walked over to them. "Hello, Richard. It's been a long time." He turned and looked up at me. His eyes were full of anger. "That was your decision, not mine." "What are you talking about? I'd never stop you seeing the children." "What do you call this then?" he asked, handing me a bundle of papers he'd taken from his jacket pocket. I looked but could make head nor tail of it. The only words that made any sense were the words restraining order. "I don't understand. What is this?" "You should know you took it out. It's an injunction preventing me from having any contact with you and that arrogant prick living in my house. I'm to have no contact with you, and I am banned from coming within 400 yards of you, him, and the house." "Tell me, Kath, how am I supposed to see my children when I can't contact you and can't come to the house?" Tears ran down his face as he took the injunction documents back from me. "I'm sorry, Richard. The first don't understand. I never took that out." "Well, somebody did." I felt a small hand tugging at me. Mummy, can Daddy come home with us?" "Please, Mummy, can he?" I looked at Richard as he pretended to blow his nose to cover the fact he was drying his eyes. He shook his head. "Not tonight, darling. Mummy has something she must do first." Richard turned to leave. "By the way, Kath, I shall deny this meeting ever took place." He started to walk away. "Richard, wait. Can I have those documents?" "No, it's my only copy. I'll email it to you. From an anonymous account, of course." He bent down, hugged Maddie and Tom, kissed them both, and walked away. Both children called out to him. He didn't look back, but I saw him dabbing at his eyes with a tissue. We walked back to Penny's car. I buckled Maddie and Tom into their seats and got in the front. Penny looked at me with disbelief. "Please tell me you didn't." "Kath, Richard may have his faults, but he's a good dad, and he's devoted to those two. I can't believe you slapped a restraining order on him." "I didn't, Penny, but I mean to find out who did." All the way home, I couldn't get his face out of my mind. He looked so desperate, so broken and deeply hurt. I tried to tell myself he deserved it. He'd betrayed me, he'd slept with another woman. Less than 7 years of marriage, and he couldn't keep it in his trousers. If he needed to have sex with someone, what the hell was wrong with me? I'd loved him dearly. There wasn't anything I wouldn't have given him. I kept myself in trim, always looked good for him. I thought he was proud of me when we went out. Just goes to show how wrong you can be. It had been almost a year since those photographs dropped through my door, and their content left little to the imagination. A young blonde, him having sex. In some shots his face wasn't visible, but I could see that tattoo, and perhaps that hurt more than anything else. I could easily read it, not that I needed to. I knew what it said. Property of Catherine Thompson, with an arrow pointing down to him. I remembered the day he'd got it done. On our first anniversary, I told him to do something to show that he loved me. I'd laughed when he showed it to me. I'm not laughing now. When I looked at the pictures, I felt sick. How could he do that to me? How could he be having sex with someone else? There had been no doubt in my mind. If he loved me, he just couldn't do that. I thought about Penny's words. He had always been a wonderful father, taking an active role from day one. He did his fair share of bringing them up, changing nappies, feeding, and bathing them. Maddie and Tom idolized him. Their mood brightened as soon as he got home. Sometimes I felt jealous of his relationship with them. That's why I was surprised when he suddenly stopped coming around to see them. He never called to arrange a visit. For 3 months we had no contact at all. Despite the shock of betrayal, I didn't hate him. and I certainly wouldn't stop him seeing the children. As Richard walked away, he couldn't believe his life had gone so wrong so quickly. A year ago, he had a good job, a nice house, a lovely wife, and 2 beautiful children. One by one, they had all been taken away. He got into the old Volvo and watched Kathy load the kids into Penny's Isuzu. He banged his forehead on the steering wheel. How could one drunken night lead to this? He never normally drank much, but that night he felt sorry for himself. His employer, Electronique plc, held their annual party in the garden of one of the large hotels in town. They erected a large marquee out on the lawns with a live band and cheap booze. It was a black tie job, and more or less compulsory for managers to attend. Normally, he went with Kath while her mother looked after the children. That year was different. Kath's mom was recovering from varicose vein surgery, and Kath was looking after her. Richard felt very alone and found himself drinking more than usual. From halfway through the evening, he could remember nothing. He knew that he'd woken up in a hotel room with the mother of all hangovers. When he checked out, he was told he'd paid the bill when he booked the room. None of it made sense. Things got worse when he got to work on Monday. His colleagues were all nudges and winks, and they called him a sly dog and other such names. Craig, his boss, didn't find it so funny. I thought you knew better. Kath's a lovely girl, and you two are so right together. I never thought you'd put that at risk for a roll in the hay with some tart. Craig, what are you talking about? I'm talking about you leaving the party with the mystery blonde on Saturday night. I can't remember much after the dinner. I woke up in a hotel room that I was supposed to have booked the previous week. I have no knowledge of how I got there, and I don't remember booking it. Why would I need a room? It's only a 10-minute taxi ride to my place. I know you were putting it away, but I didn't think you were that bad. Let me fill you in. From about 9:30 p.m., you were keeping the company of a blonde woman. Nobody recognized her, but I'll give you one thing. She was drop-dead gorgeous. Anyway, about 10:30 p.m., I saw you leaving with your arm draped around the bare shoulder of the mystery woman. There are a lot of blokes in this department from whom I'd expect that sort of behavior, but not you, Richard. I assure you, Craig, I don't remember a thing. If I had the pleasure of the young lady, then it was totally wasted because I don't remember. Well, you'd better make sure Kath doesn't find out, because she'll have your guts for garters. A week later, Kathy returned from her mother's. 2 days after that, Richard came home to a mad woman, waving pictures at him and telling him to get out. He threw some clothes in a bag and left to spend the night on his brother's sofa. By the end of the week, he got notification of divorce proceedings in his office mail. He'd never imagined Kath would use the children as weapon against him, but that was exactly what she'd done. This restraining order was the last straw. It didn't ban him from seeing Maddie and Tom. It just made it impossible to make arrangements. He started the car and headed in the direction of the place he now called home. We got home and I gave the children a snack and a drink. I used my laptop to check the email. There was nothing from Richard. I set about cooking dinner while Maddie and Tom did their schoolwork. It seems ridiculous setting homework for 5- and 6-year-old children, but that's the world we live in now. Tony got home around 5:30 p.m. His arrival was greeted by grunts from the children and a kiss from me. Tony had been my rock, standing by me and advising me through all the turmoil of the divorce. He'd found me a good divorce lawyer and helped work out a settlement. Richard never put up much of a fight. My solicitor only had to threaten restricted access to the children, and he just caved in. I don't feel good about the settlement. It seems I have everything, and he has nothing. He even has to pay the mortgage on the house he can't live in. Tony says it's his own fault for not putting up a fight and for cheating in the first place. I met Tony, or Anthony as he is known there, at work. Pendleton, Sims & Woodcock is a law firm. They specialize in corporate work, drafting contracts, ensuring their customers don't get caught out in mergers and takeovers. It's a big money company. I work in their accounts department and Tony is one of the solicitors. We met when I had to ask him to explain some of the items on his expenses claim. We often went to lunch together, and we would talk about our lives outside work. He told me he envied Richard having a stable home life and a family of his own. I, of course, told him he would meet the right person one day. Over the months, he became a close friend and my confidant. I told him everything. I even told him about Richard's tattoo. I looked at my children sitting watching cartoons while Tony went up to change out of his work clothes. Richard's tear-stained face sprung into my mind. It hadn't been a fair fight, everything we had against access to his children. I felt myself welling up as I put the dinner on the plates and set the table. Tony noticed that I was not my usual self. "What's up, babe? You seem a bit down tonight." "Oh, nothing really. I just saw a face from the past today. They don't seem to be doing that well. I was wondering if there was anything I could do. The only person that can help you in this world is yourself. There are winners and losers. The important thing is to always be on the winning side." I'm sure your friend could do something to get them out of the hole they're in. You may be right. My worrying certainly won't help. I got up and cleared away. Tony read his paper while I got the children ready for bed. Now you two go up and brush your teeth, and I'll come up and read you a story. I want Daddy to do it, yelled Thomas. Tony folded his newspaper, got up, and walked towards the staircase. Not you, said Maddie. We want our real daddy. Well, if your real daddy loved you, he'd be here, wouldn't he? But he's not, and I am. Tony, I screamed as I ran over to them. Maddie's tears were running down her face. It's not true, is it, Mummy? Daddy does love us, he told me so. Of course he loves you, sweetie, more than anything in the whole world. I don't know why Tony would say such a thing. He doesn't love us, and he doesn't like Daddy. I'm sure Tony loves you too. He's just got things on his mind. Well, I don't like him. I want to see my daddy again. I'm working on it, sweetie. Really, I am. Now let's get you tucked up in bed, and you let Mummy worry about Daddy's visits. I put them to bed and read The Little Princess before kissing them goodnight. I was fuming as I went back downstairs to confront Tony. Don't you ever talk to my children like that again? Oh, they're your children now, are they? I thought we agreed when I moved in that they were going to be our children. Richard will always be their father. There is nothing either of us can do about that. Okay, I could have put it better, but sooner or later they have to know. He's made his choice. He doesn't want to be a part of their lives anymore. I mean, when was the last time they saw him? 3 months ago. Today, they saw him today. I was late picking them up from school, so Penny met them at the school gate. When I arrived, he was there with them. Did you speak to him? No, when I arrived, he left. Chicken. What did you say? I called him a chicken, because he is. He hasn't fought anything. You got the house that he's paying for. You got more than generous child support. You even got some maintenance payments. Every demand we made, he just rolled over. As I recall, Tony, we said, give me what I want, or you'll never see your kids again. We had the only thing he wanted. Of course he rolled over. So why isn't he taking up the access he has, if they are so precious to him? I don't know, but I saw the heartbroken look on his face today. There'll be a reason, I'm sure. I don't know why I didn't tell him about the restraining order. I had the feeling that Tony knew more about it than he was letting on. Still, I kept it quiet at least until I could read it thoroughly. I checked my email, still nothing from Richard. In desperation, I looked in the junk folder. There it was, a single file called Injunction. No message, just the attachment. I printed it out and put it in my briefcase. Tony came in with an overnight bag. I forgot to tell you. I've got to go down to Southampton tomorrow. I won't be back until Friday evening. Just the one night? You'll be back on Friday? Yeah, definitely. Tell you what, Kath, why don't we go out to dinner Friday night? Okay, I'll book a table. He stepped up behind me and put his arms around me. How about a little loving on account? On account of what? On account of me not being here to get it tomorrow. Not tonight, Tony. I'm really not in the mood. I pulled his hands off and started to walk away from him. Oh, come on, Kath, you're not still angry because of what I said to Maddie. As a matter of fact, Tony, yes, I am. I can't believe you'd shatter a little girl's image of her father because of jealousy. I thought you were a bigger man than that. Jealous? You seriously think that I am jealous of that chicken? Why else would you react like that? Just because she preferred her father? Of course she prefers him. She's known him all her life. She's known you less than 6 months. I'm sorry, Kathy. Really, I am. You're right. We need to give it more time. Give it long enough and she'll come around, especially now he's not visiting. I don't want to talk about this, Tony. I'm going to bed. Rob knew something was troubling his brother. He could see the redness in the eyes that seemed to have sunk further into their sockets. He noticed the amount of times Richard's hands slipped from the spanner. Okay, what's the witch done now? Sorry, I don't know what you're getting at. I may not be as bright as you, Richie, but even I can see something's happened. Only yesterday I was telling Vicky that I thought you were getting over it, but tonight we're back to square one. Rob stood up, straightened his back, and looked down at his brother. They'd been trying to remove the engine and transmission from 1-year-old Volkswagen Passat, so the body shell could be burned out and crushed. She claims she knows nothing about the restraining order. She acted all mystified when I showed it to her. You've spoken to her? What sort of fool are you, Rich? I was there when your brief told you to stick to the letter of that damned injunction until he could get it lifted. It's all right for him. They're not his kids. You know how quickly they change at that age. I had to see them, Rob. I just had to. Rob moved over to his brother and put his arm around his shoulders. Come on, mate. We're not going to get this done tonight. Let's call it a night and go in to have beer. The two men walked back to the bungalow and were soon sitting at the kitchen table, one holding a glass of beer, the other a cup of coffee. Okay, so what happened today? Well, I've been waiting outside the school every day for the last couple of weeks, just so I could catch sight of Maddie and Tom as they came out. You want to be careful. These days, that sort of thing gets you arrested. Yeah, I know. I've already had old Bill come and check up on me. I showed the copper the injunction and he understood everything. He was divorced last year. Stick to the point, Richie. What happened today? She didn't come. Well, at least her car never came. Her mate Penny collected the kids, and I thought it was a good time to go and talk. So I hurried over to them. You should have seen them, Rob. They were so pleased to see me. I'll bet they were. It's been, what, 3 months? More or less, yeah. Anyway, while I'm hugging them and talking to them, she walks up, bold as brass, and says it's been a long time. Of course, I tell her it's her fault, not mine, and she acts all mystified. Well, I showed her the injunction, and she says she knows nothing about it. I mean, she stood there, looked me in the eyes, and told me she knew nothing about it. If I hadn't seen her signature on that pack of lies, I would have believed her. Where did that monster come from, Rob? The Kathy I knew wouldn't lie like that. She wouldn't take every penny I had and make it impossible for me to see my own children. Did I do that to her, Rob? In one drunken night, did I turn her from a kind, loving woman into a hard-nosed witch? I doubt it was all you. I think the arrogant prick she's living with has something to do with it. So what happened after you showed her the injunction? Like I said, she claimed she knew nothing about it. I decided to get out of there in case it was some sort of setup. Maddie had other ideas and wanted me to go home with them. As I walked away, Kath called out saying that she wanted a copy of the injunction. Why would she do that? She must have her own, so why ask for mine? I don't know, mate. I don't understand any of this. I always thought you two were solid. Never dreamed she would react like that to one mistake. It was just the one, wasn't it? Of course it was just one. I don't even remember that one. Anyway, I said I'd scan it and email it to her tonight, so I'd better go and do that. You be careful, Richie. That could be classed as contacting her. Don't worry. I'll set up a new Hotmail account, then deny all knowledge of it. Richard went off to his room. Looking back, I really can't think of how I came to be living with Tony. There was no big sensation, no finding him in my every thought, no falling in love, only him always being there. I'd been devastated by those photos, and I'd turned to him for support. I leaned on him, and he was always there helping me make decisions. He more or less took over the divorce, and I felt dependent on him. When I needed a hug, he was there, comforting me, telling me it was not my fault. He started taking me out, to bring me out of myself, he'd said. We went out, had a few drinks, shared a few kisses, and ended up in bed together. I was really lonely at home without Richard. When he'd suggested moving in with me, it seemed like the ideal solution. I liked him. He was always kind to me and the children. I felt no real passion for him, but it could work out. Now I saw another side of Tony, cruel and vindictive. Richard would never have said such a cruel thing to a little girl, no matter who her father was. If Tony was behind the injunction, then it definitely showed something I hadn't seen before. That night in bed, he spooned into my back and put his arm around me. I grabbed his wrist and pulled his hand away as I got out of the bed. I told you, I'm not in the mood. I want to get some sleep tonight, even if you don't, so I'm going to Maddie's room. I crept into her bedroom and climbed onto the top bunk. I lay awake listening to my little girl sleeping. My mind kept going back to that injunction. I'd seen a statement from me saying that Richard had been harassing me at work and made threats to burn the house down with me in it. I knew I'd never made that statement. It simply wasn't true. I'd been shocked to see my signature at the bottom. I resolved to set legal minds to work on it. There was a frosty atmosphere at breakfast the following day. Tony wasn't happy at being left alone in bed all night. Maddie and Tom made it clear they blamed Tony for not seeing their father, and I was getting over a largely sleepless night. In the end, I was relieved to drop the children at school and go on to work. At work, I got out the restraining order and worked through it again. The statements which formed the basis of the injunction alleged Richard had threatened both Tony and I with physical violence. My statement said that he had spent several evenings sitting in his car outside the house. None of this was true, yet it had my signature at the bottom. It stated quite clearly that the injunction was requested by Pendleton, Sims, and Woodcock on behalf of their clients Mr. Anthony Woodward and Mrs. Kathleen Thompson. I pushed it around my desk for a while. By mid-morning, I had made up my mind the best person to help me was the senior partner, Mr. Michael Pendleton. I left my office and went up to see him. "Good morning, Kathleen. What can I do for you?" "I haven't messed up my expenses again, have I?" "Oh no, sir. Nothing like that. I have a legal problem that I hope you can help me with." "Oh well, I'm not sure I'm the best person to help you. As you know, we specialize in corporate law." "I know, sir, and it makes my problem even more curious." I put the injunction on his desk. This injunction was served on my husband. It was requested by this company, and it's based on statements that I never made, yet they have my signature on the bottom. He read through the injunction and the statements. Then he read them through again. You realize you are making a very serious allegation here. I want you to think very carefully before you answer my question. Are you saying that you never asked anyone at this firm to secure this injunction? I don't need to think about that. I know I never requested it. Are you saying that you never made the statement the injunction is based on? Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm saying. Finally, are you saying that the incidents never occurred? I can't be certain about those in Anthony's statement. He certainly never mentioned anything to me about them. I can be certain that none of the incidents in what is supposed to be my statement ever occurred. So what do you want from me, Kathleen? I want that injunction overturned, so my children can see their father again, and I want to know who is behind all of this. Forgive me asking this, but aren't you in a relationship with young Anthony? You realize that if he is involved in falsifying evidence, it is likely to be the end of his career. No, sir, I didn't, but it makes no difference. My children need their father, and the injunction prevents him making arrangements to visit them and stops him coming to pick them up. Whoever requested it was not acting on my behalf, so they have lied to the court. If that person was Tony, then he wrecked his career, not me. Leave it with me, I'll see what I can find out. I'll get back to you this afternoon. I left his office and went back to work. Later, just as I was about to leave, Mr. Pendleton called and asked me to go up and see him. I rang Penny to ask her to pick up Maddie and Tom. What do I do if Richard turns up? Don't let him take them, obviously, but it's okay if he wants to talk to them for a while. What about this damned order of yours? You're not using me to trap Richard. That's why I'm going to be late, Penny. I'm trying to get it overturned. It doesn't cover the children anyway, so you don't have to worry. We said our goodbyes and I set off for Mr. Pendleton's office. As I stepped into his office, he stood up and came to meet me as if I was a client. Kathleen, good of you to come. I know it's time for you to leave. I hope you've been able to get someone else to collect your children. All taken care of. Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. You ladies are so efficient. I don't know how you do it. Please take a seat. I sat down, and he took up his usual position. He rested his elbows on the desk and steepled his fingers. I realized he was having trouble knowing how to tell me what he had found out. First, Kathleen, let me tell you how much I appreciate you bringing this matter to me. If you had taken this elsewhere, it could have caused the company a great deal of embarrassment. He paused, still trying to put it all together in an acceptable form. I've been in touch with the clerk of the court with respect to your statement. Normally, they would only accept an original, he explained. But in the case of this injunction, a photocopy was submitted. He knew he should have refused it, but didn't like to offend such a prestigious law firm as ours. On closer inspection of that copy, he suspects your signature was added in a cut and paste operation. I sank down into the chair knowing what was coming next, but hoping I was wrong. Devinda Trent requested the injunction. I've spoken to the young lady, and I'm satisfied that she was acting on instructions from Mr. Woodward, who apparently expressed himself very forcefully. We will be dealing with Ms. Trent in due course. A petition to overturn the injunction will be placed before the judge tomorrow morning, and it should be lifted by lunchtime. He looked at me sympathetically. I'm sorry, Kathleen, I can see that you were hoping for a different outcome. You must understand the firm had nothing to do with this matter. Young Anthony was working alone on this one and using our good name to get what he wanted. He got up, walked around and sat on the edge of his desk and looked at me. Are you okay? Do you want to sit for a minute or two to let things sink in? Shall I ask Jenny to fetch you some tea? No. No thank you, sir. I think it's time I got back to my children. Of course, my dear, and please call me Michael. He put his arm around my shoulder and guided me to the door. There is one more thing, sir, Michael. What Anthony did deprived my children the chance to see their father for 3 months. I can't forgive that. I don't think I can continue to work here. Please, Kathleen, don't do anything hasty. Let's wait and see what Monday brings. I agreed and left his office. I called Penny and told her I was on my way. That night, while the children slept, I started to think. If Anthony could interfere in one part of my life, what else had he done? I got out all the legal correspondence from the last year. As I dropped them on the desk, the photos dropped out. No matter how often I saw them, they still made me feel ill. I went through them and found myself thinking aloud. Oh, Richard, how could you do this to me? If you had to screw someone, what was wrong with mine? How could you betray me? Suddenly it hit me. I looked again. I saw her and looked at him having sex with her. There it was, or rather there it wasn't. That damn tattoo. I should have been able to see it, but it wasn't there. It wasn't Richard in that picture. There were 2 men in that room. In some his face was visible, but always with his eyes closed. I spread them out on the desk. I could only positively identify Richard in half of them. Why didn't he tell me about the other man? He must have known. I looked at the papers for the divorce. At the time I had been in such a state that I couldn't remember much about it. Now I looked at the grounds. That Richard Thompson did commit adultery with Ms. Eva Belinkowa. Where did the lawyer get the name? I never knew her name, but there it was. The only other person who discussed the divorce with the solicitor was Tony. He did it because I was too upset to deal with anything. Eva Belinkowa. I'd seen that name before somewhere. I thought it had something to do with work. The next day would see more investigations. The following morning, I started with a computer search using the woman's name. I found a number of payments to her. The last one, almost a year ago, was for £2,000. All the payments came from Tony's cost center. I went down to his office to talk to Maggie, his secretary. "Hello, Kathy, what brings you here? You know he is away, don't you?" I smiled at her before making my excuses. "Yes, I know he's in Southampton. I was hoping you could give me some information. We are doing an audit, and we've found a number of payments to Ms. Eva Belinkowa. I don't suppose you know who she is?" Maggie blushed. "I do, but I wish I didn't. I don't think it's right using women like her to secure business." "What do you mean women like her?" "She's an escort. Mr. Woodward uses her sometimes when he wants to keep a client sweet. I don't think it's right, so he has to deal with her direct. I want nothing to do with it." "Do you have a file on her, Maggie?" "Yes, I'll fetch it for you." She got up, went to the cabinet, and soon came back with a file. She opened it and looked inside. She's a lovely girl. You'd think someone who looked like that could do better than earning a living lying on her back. She passed me the file. "Mr. Woodward isn't in any trouble, is he?" "Oh, no more than normal, Maggie. Don't worry." I didn't open the file until I got back to my office. I sat at my desk and went through it. Maggie was right. She was a beautiful woman, and her Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Kiev indicated she was intelligent. The pictures in the file certainty showed her in a better light than the divorce pictures. I found the phone number and called her. I was not surprised that at 10 o'clock a.m. it went to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me and continued with my normal work. It was nearly midday when she called me. "Hello, this is Eva Belinkowa. You called me earlier." "Hello, Ms. Belinkowa. My name is Kathleen Thompson from Pendleton, Sims, and Woodcock. I have a matter I'd like to discuss with you. Could we meet for lunch?" "You work for Mr. Woodward?" I told him. "I don't work for him no more." "No, I don't work for Mr. Woodward. I really do need to talk to you." "Is for work?" "We don't need to talk. You give me name, time and place. I do the rest and send you a bill. I'm afraid this one has a few special requirements we need to talk about." "Do you know Roberto's?" "I'll meet you there at 1:30 p.m. "Yes, I know Roberto's." "Okay, we have lunch. You pay." "I see you later, Miss Thompson." I arrived early and she was fashionably late, but there was no mistaking her arrival. Every man and some of the women turned to look. We shook hands and she sat down. A waiter came with menus for us and took her drinks order. He returned later and took our order. I looked across at her and realized why she commanded such a high price. "Would you like to eat first, or should I start now?" "We talk while we wait. What do you want me to do?" I reached into my bag, pulled out a photo, and put it on the table. She took one look at it. Her bright, laughing eyes suddenly turned cold and her face lost its color. The anger in her voice was obvious. I tell him, "Now I tell you. I never do that again. You go now, you tell him." "Tell who, Eva?" "Woodward. He sent you." "I don't work for him no more." "Eva, I don't work for Mr. Woodward." "Then who are you?" I tapped the photo of Richard. "I'm his wife." She had started to get up, but she slumped back down in her seat. After a long pause, she looked at me again. "Well, quite frankly, I'm disappointed. When a man spends most of the night telling me how beautiful his wife is, I expect her to be outstanding. You are pretty, but to be thinking of you while he is with me is a little insulting. Now put that picture away and tell me what you want from me." Our food arrived and Eva started to tuck in. "Please, we eat now, talk later." We ate in relative silence until the plates were cleared away. Then Eva spoke again. "So what do you want?" "I want to know what happened that night, and why did it upset you so much?" "I am escort, yes. People have no respect for me, but I respect myself. What I did that night make me stop respecting myself. My job is to make people happy, but Woodward paid me to make your husband very unhappy. Nobody deserves that, your husband especially. He is a good man, you know. I invited him to my room, but he wouldn't come. He told me his wife is a wonderful woman and very beautiful. I had to get him so drunk he could hardly stand and took him to a room Woodward booked for him. When we got there, he was too drunk to manage anything. I tell you now, I am very experienced. If I can't get a man aroused, nobody can. He was too drunk to manage anything. I have to pose with him, pretending. What about the sex? You weren't posing then. That was Woodward. He said for what he was paying, someone was going to do me, so he set the camera on automatic and he did me. I am an escort, yes, it's my job to be done. I reached out and took her hand. No, Eva, nobody deserves that. Your husband, he is a nice man. Woodward said he needed the pictures for insurance in case your husband didn't do what he promised. You know what make me feel really bad? I see him checking out in the morning and I smile at him. He say to me, sorry, have we met before? Then he say, no, if I'd met you before I'd remember. I interrupted. That's so cheesy, and he uses it on all attractive women he meets. It's as close as he gets to flirting. Yes, that's what he said, but I knew he didn't remember me at all. I felt so cheap. He did nothing, but I helped Woodward blackmail him. If you have the pictures, I guess he didn't do what Woodward wanted. I am glad. Woodward is a creep. Your husband is a good man. You keep him, yes? I'm sorry, Eva. I lied to you. He is not my husband. He is my ex-husband. You divorce him because of me? No, I divorced him because of those pictures, which is not quite the same thing. I told you, Woodward is creep. Your husband. He didn't do what Woodward wanted? I told you, he is good man. It wasn't about business, Eva. Richard never did business with Mr. Woodward. Eva and I sat and talked for another half an hour. She was a really nice woman. I could understand any man wanting to spend time in her company. She would make him feel like $1 million. I returned to work and called Mr. Pendleton. He queried the payment for the services of Ms. Belinkowa. He seemed concerned that the firm had paid her and asked for details of all the payments made. I called my mother and asked her to pick up Tom and Maddie and take them to her house for the night. I didn't want them in the house when Tony came home. My head was reeling. The man I thought had betrayed me hadn't. The one I had trusted to help me through my turmoil turned out to be the cause of my problems. I sat at my desk and cried my heart out. I saw people come to my door and turn away. Eventually, Brenda came in and spoke to me. She asked what was wrong and I let it all pour out. Brenda just sat on my desk and listened until I got it all out, then started to ask questions. Do you love Tony? No, I don't think so. Certainly not now, I don't. In fact, I don't think I ever really knew him. Richard, how do you feel about him? I don't know. I'm so ashamed. You should have heard the way Eva was talking about him. She made him sound like the perfect husband. A year ago, you would have agreed with her. You're right, I would. I wish I'd never seen those damned photos. Well, you did, and you divorced him. Most women would have done the same. I should have listened to him, talked to him, believed him. It's easy to say that now, but a year ago things looked very different. Why don't you go home and think about what you're going to do? Sleep on it. I haven't got time to sleep on it. Tony gets back tonight. Still, I know what I'm going to do about him. I started as soon as I got home. I pulled out the 2 biggest suitcases and started packing Tony's belongings into them. It took all of my strength to lug them down the stairs. By 5 p.m., I had as much as I could find packed up and ready to go. I sat down with a glass of wine waiting for Tony to arrive. I thought about Richard. He had a right to know what I'd found out. I didn't know how I was going to tell him, but he certainly had to know. It was half an hour later that I heard Tony's key in the lock. I went to meet him at the front door. As he came in, he saw the suitcases, then looked at me. What's all this? Are we going somewhere? We're going nowhere. You are moving out? What? You heard me. You're moving out and you are going now. What the hell has brought this on? I know, Tony. I know about the injunction. I've spoken to Eva Balinkova. I know it all. I want you out of my house and out of my life. Now hang on, let's talk about this, he said as he put his hands on my shoulders and started to push me back towards the dining room. His hands were pressing into my shoulders as he spoke. I don't know what you thought was going to happen, but I'm going nowhere. I've invested too much time, effort and money in this to walk away now. Tony, you're hurting me. Oh, you've noticed, have you? Well, this is just a taste, so why don't you sit down and I'll tell you how it's going to be. We'd moved back into the dining room and I felt a chair behind me. Here I had plenty of room to move. I quickly pushed both hands up between his outstretched arms, knocking his hands off of my shoulders. I must have caught his nose with my nail as blood started to run down it. He ran his finger down his nose and looked at the blood on his fingers. You idiot, he said and swung his open hand round to slap me. I saw it coming, grabbed his wrist and spun round, throwing him over my shoulder. I offered thanks to Richard for insisting I took self-defense lessons. My instructor told me to put the attacker on his back and get the hell out of there, but this was my house and I was going nowhere. I still held wrist as he lay groaning on the floor. I put my foot on his chest and with one hand pushing his elbow straight, I used the other to push his fingers back. I looked down at him. He'd knocked over a chair as he went down and the back of the chair was underneath him. Why, Tony? What did Richard ever do to you? Nothing. He had what I wanted, so I took it. Come off it, Tony. You don't care for me. If you did, you wouldn't have tried to attack me. Not just you. You stupid idiot. The whole family thing. That's what I wanted. The business world likes family men. They think they can trust them. I'd never become a partner as a single man. Just think how long it would take to find a woman, marry her, and produce a couple of children. I saw the chance of doing it all in a year. You're an attractive woman. The kids are cute. I had it made. Look, think about it. I can still give you a better life than he ever could. I pushed down with my foot so the 4-inch heel pushed between his ribs. If you make another comment like that, I push this heel through your ribs and give you severe heartache. That's when I realized I knew what I wanted. I took my hand off his elbow and reached out and picked up the phone and called Richard's mobile. He answered quickly. Hello, Richard. I need to talk to you. Can you come over? Yes, I know. I had it overturned this morning. No, the kids are fine. I just need to talk to you. Right away if you can. Okay. Oh, and Richard, bring your shotgun. I disconnected and looked down at Tony again. Well, I think you've got between 5 and 10 minutes before he gets here. Do you really want to be here when I tell him what you did? You really expect me to be scared of that chicken? You don't know him. You tried to take his children away, the most important thing in his life. I'd say that makes him very dangerous. Now I'm going to let you get up. I suggest you use what time you've got, clearing your stuff out. Tony was leaving as the old Volvo pulled up outside. Richard got out of the car and watched the red BMW disappear from view. He walked up the drive, and I didn't wait for him to ring the doorbell. I threw the door open, walked out onto the doorstep, threw both arms around him, and hugged him. It had never happened before, but as I wrapped my arms around him, I felt his body stiffen. It was like hugging a stranger. He reached behind and took hold of my arms and pulled them away. What do you want, Kath? You've taken everything. I've got nothing more to give you. So what's this all about? And since when did I own a shotgun? I started to realize how big a mountain I had to climb. The man who'd loved me, depended on me, and trusted me, now looked for an ulterior motive in everything. It's nothing like that, Richard. All I want is some of your time. I need to explain things, try to make things right. Wasn't that lover boy I saw driving away? What time is he coming back, and is he bringing the police with him to arrest me for breaking the injunction? There is no injunction, and Tony's not coming back. Not tonight, not ever. The only reason I mentioned a shotgun was to get him out of here before you arrived. Now please come inside. We walked inside. I took him into the living room, and he sat on the sofa. He was perched on the edge as if he expected to get up at any second. Would you like a drink? I asked. I'll have a sparkling water if you've got any. Failing that, coffee would be good. Are you sure? I've got beer or wine. You don't have to worry about driving. You could stay over here if you want. I'm sure. Water or coffee. I don't drink now. Not since I got so drunk I lost track of a whole night. It turned out to be the most important night of my life. The night my whole world fell apart. That's never going to happen again. I set the filter machine going. I knew just how he liked his coffee, and that was exactly how he was going to get it. Where are you living now? With my brother Rob, at the scrapyard. He and Vicky are letting me sleep in one of the kids' rooms until I can save enough money for a deposit on a flat. He's been very good to me, even let me have the old Volvo for 50 quid. It's an insurance write-off. It's not pretty, but it's transport. How about work? You must be doing well, if you can take time out to come to the school. They let me go about 6 months ago. I can't blame them. I was the next best thing to useless for months. They've been very good about it. They give me a bit of contract work. Still, you are doing okay though? I mean, you're still making the payments on time. My children aren't going to suffer just because their dad stuffed up. You're not making this any easier. Is that what I'm supposed to do? Make your life easy? Looking around, I think I've done a pretty good job. Excuse me being cynical, Kath, but being thrown out of his house and taken to the cleaners does that to a man. I made one mistake, just one. And what did you do to me? That's just it, Richard, you didn't. You know what's worse? I don't remember anything about it, Dot. What did you just say? I said you didn't make a mistake. It was all a put-up job. You never had sex with her, she told me. I really am so sorry, Richard. The look on his face changed from anger to total disbelief. But the photographs, I mean, that was me, right? Half of them were. The rest were of Tony. Eva told me how it was done. She is really ashamed of her part. She's offered to help in any way she can. I went into the kitchen to pour the coffee and to have a cry. Every time I looked at Richard, the first could see his heart was breaking again. Just seeing him like that tore me apart. I returned with his coffee and a glass of wine for myself. He seemed to have calmed when I returned. He picked up the coffee, took a sip, and smiled at me. Some things haven't changed. You still make a great cup of coffee. He put the cup down again. Now tell me how Loverboy set me up and why. I'll tell you whatever you want, but please don't call him that. I don't love him. He was more like company, really. Yes, we slept together, but it was not love. Not like you and I used to be. Call him a-hole, shithead, anything you like, but not lover boy. You are the only man I've ever loved, and I stuffed that up, didn't I? I started to cry again, and he got up and came to me holding my head to his waist. A year ago, holding my head there would have aroused him. Not this time. He was flaccid, and it was like he was comforting a child. I recovered, and he sat down again while I described all the events that had got us to that point. As I did so, I noticed how quiet he became. Many people made the mistake of taking quietness for acceptance. I knew Richard. When he got angry, he didn't rant and rave. He went quiet, running things over and over in his head until it eventually exploded. Richard, promise me you won't do anything silly. We all need you more than ever now. Why don't you stay here the night? You'll be calmer in the morning. You can sleep in one of the children's rooms if you like. I can't stay. I've got a date tonight. Don't worry though, I won't do anything stupid. I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach. He had a date. In all of the scenarios I'd gone through in my head, I completely missed that one. He decided to move on and was dating. I don't know why it should have come as a surprise. After all, I'd been living with Tony for almost 6 months. I winced as he got up to leave. I used the only weapon left in my armory. The children are anxious to see you. Could you come around tomorrow? Really? You'd be okay with that? Of course I'm okay with it. Tell you what, why don't you collect them from Mum's tomorrow? You could bring them back here, and I'll stay at Mum's until Sunday night. You can take them out or just stay here with them. Tears welled up in his eyes as he took the house keys I gave him. Are you sure about this? They're your children as much as mine. You should be able to see them whenever you want. As he left, he turned back to me. Thanks, Kath. I'll be there by about 1 p.m. I've got something to do in the morning. Mum was hardly understanding when I told her what I'd found out. She'd never liked Tony, creepy little man she called him. She managed to avoid saying, I told you so. She loved Richard and thought I should have given him another chance. In her day, you stood by your man. All men got drunk now and again, and sometimes they got carried away. But a man who looked after his children and loved his wife was worth his weight in gold. Waiting for him to collect Maddie and Tom, I could see her getting excited. It had been almost a year since we'd split, and she still called him her son-in-law. Richard turned up at 1:30 p.m. Mum insisted we all sat down for lunch. She was like the cat that got the cream. All her family together around the table for the first time in a year. She loved it. When Richard left with the children, she kissed him and told him to come back soon. We both waved them off, and she turned to me. Well, my girl, what are you going to do now? I don't know, Mom. It's such a mess, I don't know where to start. Do you think you can rebuild your life with him? He still loves you. You know that? I'm not so sure about that. You didn't hear him last night. He's so hurt and so angry. He'll calm down, especially now he can be with his children. You know that's the first smart move you've made in a year. I know that, Mom. I'm going to try, but I don't know if it's possible. I think I'm going to need all the help I can get. Well, in that case, you need to start eating humble pie and creating alliances. Mum was right, of course. I needed to get more people on my side if I wanted to get Richard back. I'd start with his family. The weekend went well for me. Mum and I were closer than we'd been since Dad died. I suppose it was because we had a common purpose. I arrived home at 7 p.m. just in time to help Richard get the children ready for bed. Both Maddie and Tom were really happy and told me what a great time they'd had with their father. After they settled, I poured a glass of wine for me and a sparkling water for Richard, and we sat and talked about the weekend. I suggested he might like to pick them up from school sometimes and spend the evening with us. We parted on good terms that night and gave me some hope for the future. Monday morning came all too soon. I was very nervous about going to work and confronting Tony again. I'd already typed up a resignation letter, but I felt obliged to honor the pledge to Michael Pendleton, so I turned up for work as normal. I watched from the window as Tony arrived and parked in his reserved space. He seemed to have a spring in his step as he walked into the building. I was preoccupied with how I was going to get through the day. I failed to notice of the white flatbed truck which pulled into the space next to Tony's BMW. Anthony Woodward hadn't had the best weekend, finding a hotel for Friday night, then looking for a flat on Saturday. The events of Friday evening had taken the shine off the success of his trip to Southampton, but this morning that was all behind him. The trip had been successful. He had brought a high-value customer to the firm. Today he expected to have praise heaped upon him. The greeting from his secretary came as no surprise to him. Good morning, Mr. Woodward. Did you have a successful trip? Yes, thank you, Maggie, very successful. Mr. Pendleton would like to see you, sir. First thing he said, shall I tell him you're on your way? If you would, Maggie, thank you. He dropped his briefcase off in his office and made his way to the top floor. When he got to Michael Pendleton's office, the secretary told him to go straight in. Michael invited him to sit down and pulled out a file. Anthony didn't wait to be asked. He immediately started to report his success. "Well, Michael, I'm pleased to say we now have another £1 million client. That's a minimum, by the way." "I'm glad to hear it, Anthony, but that isn't why I wanted to see you. It seems you have been a naughty boy, and you have used the good offices of this company to do so." "I'm sorry, Michael, I don't understand. Do you deny that you pressured Devinda Trent into filing a request for an injunction against Mr. Richard Thompson?" Anthony started to feel uncomfortable. "Yes, I did, but it was urgent. He was making threats against Kathy and me. We needed that injunction for our own protection." "So you deny providing false evidence for that injunction?" "Yes, of course I do. I take it you can provide the original statement signed by Mrs. Thompson." "You see, Mrs. Thompson denies ever providing a statement. She also says the allegations are false. You provided the court with a copy, so where is the original?" "Damn," said Anthony as he sprang from the chair. He turned and for the first time noticed the 2 security guards who had quietly slipped into the office. "From that response, I guess it's true. Please sit down, I haven't finished yet." Anthony sat back in the chair. He already knew his career at Pendleton, Sims, and Woodcock was over. The question now is how bad it was going to get. Now we come to the accounting problems. I have here a list of payments to a Ms. Eva Belinkowa. They were all signed off by you. What exactly has this young lady been doing for us? I see you've listed the expense as entertainment. Just what sort of entertainment does she provide? Look, Michael, keeping the client happy is what gets the business. Sometimes we have to do things we don't like to get that business. So on the last occasion you used Ms. Belinkowa, what client did she entertain? He must have been important because you paid her twice the normal fee. I can't say. I'd need to look at my records. Ms. Belinkowa says you used her to acquire materials to blackmail our client. That's not true. He wasn't a client. I've heard enough, Anthony. We will be providing all our evidence to the police. I expect you to be facing charges. I expect the Law Society to take action resulting in revoking your license to practice. I think we're finished here. These 2 gentlemen will escort you to your office. You have an hour to remove your personal items and leave these offices." The spring had gone from Anthony's step as he left the building. His face dropped even more when he saw Richard Thompson standing in front of his parking space. With his possessions in a box, he walked across the car park. Richard stood in his path and didn't move. As he reached Richard, Anthony put the box down. He looked at Richard. "It's a bit late to grow a backbone now, isn't it? Now step aside and let me get to my car." Richard stepped back and turned with his right arm extended towards the parking space. Anthony's mouth dropped open as he saw the 3-foot cube of red painted metal that was occupying his parking space. He walked over to it, running his hand on the metal. When he noticed the BMW badge still on what remained of the bonnet, he turned and swung at Richard. "You a-hole!" he yelled as his fist glanced off Richard's shoulder. The contact was all he needed. Richard firmly planted his foot between Anthony's legs and then stepped in. As Anthony folded, Richard brought his knee up into his opponent's face and both hands down on the back of his neck. He stepped back, allowing Anthony to fall to the ground. Blood oozed from his nose and mouth as he struggled to get up. Richard stood still as Anthony got to his feet. He stood, supporting himself on the cube of metal as 2 police constables walked towards them across the car park. "Perfect timing, officers," said Anthony. "You must have seen everything. I want this man charged with assault." "And your name would be?" asked the policeman. "Anthony Woodward." "Anthony Woodward, I am arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to blackmail. You are not obliged to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention, when questioned, something you later rely on in court." The 2 officers cuffed his hands behind his back, while Anthony continued to protest. "But what about his assault on me? You must have seen it." "Yes, sir. We watched you punch this gentleman and him retaliating with sufficient force to protect himself." He turned to Richard. "You might like to make a note of our numbers, sir, in case you want to press charges." "Him press charges? What about me?" "Look what he's done to my car," yelled Anthony, nodding towards the cube of scrap. "Would your car be a red BMW, sir? Like that one over there?" Anthony followed the policeman's gaze and saw his car, completely intact, on the other side of the car park. The policeman picked up the key and Anthony's box belongings. He placed the box inside the car and returned to lead Anthony to the patrol car. Richard followed them, talking to Anthony as they walked. "You'd better get used to this, Woodward. This is only the beginning. There must be plenty of laws against what you did to me. I'll make sure you're charged with every one of them. You tried to take everything I valued. Now it's my turn." As the patrol car left, Rob pulled the lorry back into the car park and used the HIAB crane to pick up the cube of scrap. With the cube back on the truck, he jumped down and with a big smile on his face, he walked over and high-fived Richard. Oh, Richie, the look on his face was worth taking time off from work. I loved it. What about phase 2? Starts tonight. In a week or so, you'll be driving a nice new Beamer. Brenda walked into my office and went straight to the window. Hey, Kath, come and look at what's going on in the car park. I went to the window and watched Anthony being driven away in a police car. Richard was there also. He was laughing, really laughing. His brother Rob had his lorry in the car park, loading something on the back. When Rob jumped down from the truck, they high-fived each other and slapped each other on the back. I hoped that whatever they were up to didn't get Richard into trouble. It would break the children's hearts to get him back than have him taken away again. I wondered how I was going to make things right if he got locked up. After lunch, I got a call from Michael Pendleton. He told me what had happened earlier and asked if I still wanted to resign. Of course I didn't. With Tony gone, what would be the point? He also went to great pains to assure me that Tony was completely on his own and the firm didn't condone his actions. I guess he was worried about Richard or me suing the firm. By the end of the day, most people forgot about Tony's departure and the altercation in the car park. I left to pick up the children from school. To my surprise, I found the old Volvo sitting outside the gates and Richard talking to Penny. They both smiled as they chatted. I got out of the car and walked over to them. As I reached them, the children started to come out. I think everyone heard Maddie scream when she saw him. Daddy! She ran to the gate with Tom right behind her. He bent down, sitting on his heels with his arms outstretched. They ran into his embrace and he hugged them close. Daddy, will you come home with us tonight? Tom asked him, if it's okay with Mommy? He looked up at me and I nodded. He smiled at me for the first time since the whole thing kicked off. He gave me a genuine smile. I couldn't help myself. Tears filled my eyes and I had to turn away. Why don't you ride in Daddy's car? I'm sure he'd like that. They didn't care about it being old and beat up. The only thing that mattered was that Daddy was driving. Richard stayed until the children were in bed. I tried to talk to him before he left. I saw you and Rob talking in the car park. You're up to something, aren't you? I put my hands on his arm as he reached for the door catch. Please don't do anything that will get you into trouble, Richard. We can't stand to lose you again. He put his other hand on mine. Don't worry, I'm going to bring him down. But my children won't be visiting me in prison. That night, Tony's car disappeared from the company car park. The police found it the next evening crashed and burned out in a wood on the outskirts of town. Richard sued Tony for damages, claiming all the child support and maintenance he had paid and for damage to his reputation and to our marriage. His solicitor put a value of £200,000 on it. He'd meant everything he said to Tony. He decided Tony valued his job, his fortune, and his car above all else. He seemed driven to destroying the man who tried to steal his life. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted the old Richard back. The only time I saw that side was when he was with the children. Richard and Rob couldn't contain their laughter. Do you know, insurance companies refuse to pay out on drive-away theft of these cars? Rob was talking about the red BMW 5 Series. They say they can't be driven without the key. They're right, of course, but if you've got a blank key and know how to reprogram it, it's a piece of cake. He'd already taken out the passenger seat, and Richard was busy clipping the carpets back out of the way. Rob set to work grinding away at the ID plate. Once he'd removed all the paint from the plate, he got an electric drill and cleaned the paint from the indents. Out came the oxyacetylene gas torch, and a little burning meant the remains of the paint was easily scraped out. Rob was a skilled welder. Filling in the indented number was child's play. He went back to the angle grinder, and in no time there was no trace of the original number. He passed Richard a set of punches and a 5-pound hammer, along with a number on a piece of paper. Okay, Richie, get this number punched in here, and I'll make a start on the engine ID. In one evening it was done. The only thing left was the repainting and refitting of carpets and seat. Rob, is there any way he could prove that it's his car? Not a chance. The number came from an identical car we pulled off the road after a big smash. It was written off, so you bought the wreck and rebuilt it. So where is the other car? What do you think they found burned out in the woods? I had to dispose of it. I put it through the crusher. I tell you, Richie, your new car will be cleaner than a whistle. He's out on bail now, you know. Yeah, I heard. Any chance he'll get off? I shouldn't think so. Not now Eva's turned Queen's evidence. I want to see her, you know. She surprised me. She's really nice. I thought she'd be hard, being an escort and all. So she's not hard then? No, like I say, really nice and absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, she wanted to help, so when they offered her immunity, she offered to testify. So what do you think he'll do when he sees you and his baby? I'm hoping he'll go crazy, maybe even attack me, so I can get him arrested again. Huh, and he told Kath you were a chicken. You fight the battles you can win, Rob, and right now the big guns are all on my side. They walked back to the bungalow, and Richard thought about what his brother had said. So when did you talk to Kath? I didn't, but she's spoken to Vicky. They are getting quite friendly again. You know you've got to sort out what to do about her. Vicky says she's carrying a lot of guilt. Now she knows how it feels. I thought I brought our world crashing down, but it was him. First things first, Rob, I deal with him, and then I'll worry about her. 2 weeks after Tony's arrest, Richard turned up to the school with a new car. Maddie recognized it immediately. Daddy, why are you driving Uncle Tony's car? It's not Uncle Tony's car, sweetheart. It just looks like Uncle Tony's. It doesn't just look like it. It's identical. Where did you get the money to buy a car like this? I asked. I bought it off Rob. It's an insurance write-off. It cost me £1,000 and I got £200 for the Volvo. Don't worry, I'm sure I can pay for it. The grin that told me I wasn't getting the whole story. I'd never known Richard drive around town so much. Since he got the new car, he seemed to want to drive everywhere. Several of my friends have commented. They seemed to see something significant in the car being exactly the same as Tony's. For me, it was a constant reminder of what that creep did to us. Richard was still living with Rob and Vicky. I tried constantly to get him to stay over, but he always refused. To make it worse, he was still dating. He told me it was no one special, but I couldn't help worrying. He was a single man, so anything could happen. I put my faith in that tattoo, scaring off any woman who got too close, but I knew that was really a false hope. Every day I cursed myself for being so stupid. I watched him with the children, saw love he had for them, and remembered how he'd once given that much love to me. As the trials approached, I prayed that once it was over, we could be together again. Richard made a point of attending the trials. The first one was on the charge of misappropriation of funds and that Anthony had used company funds to pay for something which had no connection to the company. Eva Belinkowa was the star of the show. She described in detail how she had been paid to seduce Richard and how Anthony had told her it was all in the interest of business. She cried when she told how she discovered the real reason for the job. Her accent was heavier than normal, and her English not so good, as she portrayed herself as an innocent Ukrainian farm girl, taken advantage of by an evil man. As she left the witness box, she smiled up at Richard. At the end of the first day, she waited outside the public gallery for him and took him to dinner. Richard was amazed by her ability to hold a conversation on almost any subject. That, combined with her obvious beauty, was the reason she commanded such a high price for her services. As they ate, he looked around the room and soon realized most of the men in the restaurant envied him. When the coffee was served, she reached across the table and put her hand on his. "Would you like to come home with me tonight?" Richard felt somewhat embarrassed. "Well, you are certainly direct, but there is no need to do that. You don't owe me anything." "I know this. I don't offer because I think I owe you. I offer because I want to." Richard the first go to bed with many men. Rich men, powerful men, but always is because they want it. Sometimes I like to go to bed with a man because it is what I want. I want you, Richard. You are a good man. A nice man. I think this when I first meet you. I think will be good for me and good for you also. The waiter arrived with the bill, and Richard reached for his wallet, but Eva stopped him. "I invite you. Is my treat." And she placed her black diner's card on the plate. They left the restaurant and took a cab to Eva's Docklands flat. Richard walked over to the window and looked out across the river while Eva poured the drinks. "Are you sure you just want water?" "That's about the only thing I am sure of right now." Eva fetched the glasses and passed one to Richard. She looped her arm around his and sipped her champagne. She put her other hand behind his neck and pulled his head down to kiss him. "Now you are not drunk, there are no cameras, and you are a single man. We can enjoy ourselves, yes?" "Oh, yes," said Richard as he pulled her to him and kissed her. Eva took his hand and led him to the bedroom. They had sex, and once done, they lay wrapped in each other's arms. Richard climbed off her and was silent. Eva knew what he was thinking. He was asking himself the question most men ask themselves when they've made love to a woman for the first time. She turned to him, kissed him gently, and answered his unasked question. "Thank you, darling, that was wonderful. I bet you say that to all the blokes." "To my clients, yes. They are paying and they want to hear it." "You are not client. I say it to you because I mean it. Most men just screw me. It's all about them getting what they want. You make love to me. How I feel is important to you. I like this. It makes me feel precious. Kathy is a lucky woman." "Not anymore, she's not. We're divorced, remember. You will go back to her. When your anger is gone, you will. I know this. How can you say that? Is it just your way of saying you don't want to see me again?" "Of course not. I like being with you. I love making love with you, but I am not giving up my work. I like my lifestyle, and I want to make money while I still can. You will not like that, I think. Then there is the other thing." What other thing? You are still in love with her. That's why you are so upset about what she did. You can't believe that someone you love so much could hurt you like that. What makes you think she wants me back? Oh, she want you all right. This I know for sure. Trust me. So now what? Now we have a shower and get some sleep. Tomorrow we make love again before we go to court. The following day in court, it was obvious deals had been done. Anthony changed his plea to guilty and threw himself on the mercy of the court. His counsel pleaded his case, telling the judge that because of the conviction, his legal career was over. Anthony had offered to pay the money back to Pendleton, Sims, and Woodcock. The judge handed down a sentence of 3 years in prison, suspended for 5 years. Richard was furious. He knew there was a chance of a lenient sentence, but hadn't expected anything as light as that. He had to leave the public gallery to avoid his anger spilling out. As he waited outside for Eva, Tony and his lawyer walked past. The lawyer positioned himself between the two adversaries. As they passed, Richard looked up to see Anthony smiling down at him. He started to get up only to find a hand on his shoulder, pushing him back down. Eva looked down at him. What you expect? You really think one lawyer is going to punish another? No, they stick together, these people. I expected him to go down. One judge gives a single mom 2 weeks inside for stealing a bottle of milk. He steals a couple of grand and he walks, because he is one of their own. Yes, of course, it happens everywhere. In Ukraine, he would not get to court, I think. Come, I need coffee, and you need to be calm before you go home. They found a small coffee shop and sat and talked. Eva pointed out that it was not really a defeat. A suspended sentence would be implemented if he was found guilty on a subsequent charge, and they still had the blackmail charge to come. Richard was calmer when he left. He'd given Eva his number and hoped she would call. I knew things had gone badly at court when Richard didn't come around for 2 days. He wouldn't want Maddie and Tom to see him angry. The first night I rang Vicky and was surprised to learn he hadn't come home after the first day. I was so worried. I asked Vicky to call me when he did come home. I heaved a sigh of relief when I got the text. Don't worry. He's back. Vicky. It was another day before he came to see the children. You'd have thought he'd been gone for months, the way they greeted him. When we put them to bed that evening, he stopped to tell me all about the trial. I tried to be as angry as he was, but I really just wanted Tony out of our lives. I wanted him punished for what he'd done to us, but I couldn't make myself as angry as Richard. The way I saw things, it all got in the way of us getting back together. Vicky had been so sympathetic recently. I decided to enlist her help. Rob wasn't keen. Vicky's logic was indisputable, but he still didn't like what she was asking him to do. It felt like he was kicking his own brother out. He kept telling himself it was for his own good, and that in the long run Richard would thank him. Still, he couldn't feel good. As he waited for Richard to come home, he knew he had prevaricated enough already. He saw the lights as the Beamer pulled up outside. He heard the car door close and, shortly after, the sound of Richard's key in the lock. Richie, before you run off to your room, can I have a word, mate? Sure, Rob. What's on your mind? You know Vicky, and I support you in everything, don't you? Richard nodded to confirm. When we offered you a room here, it was supposed to be a short-term thing, until you were back on your feet. That's taken a bit longer than we imagined, and you've been here nearly a year now. The children need their own rooms, Richie. You're right, Rob. I never meant to be a burden to you. I'll find myself a flat. I'll have to find some more work to pay for it, but you need your space, and I really need to stand on my own 2 feet again. There's something else you should think about. You're paying the mortgage on a house bigger than this one with just as many bedrooms. Haven't you thought about moving back in there? Move back in with Kathy? I'm not sure either of us is ready for that. Vicky assures me that Kath would have no objections, and it would solve a lot of problems. Vicky came into the room, obviously checking to see if her husband needed any help. She joined the conversation. Richard, what's so bad about moving in with your wife and children? You mean my ex-wife? The woman who slept with the man who set me up? Yes, the woman who found out what he had done and did her best to put it right. Look, Richard, you are Rob's brother, and we love you, but you can't go on with this self-pity. You think it's only you fighting that Woodward creep, but just remember who told you. Who told his employer and got him fired and prosecuted. While you boys have been doing all your macho posturing, she's done more to bring him down than you have. But she was sleeping with my enemy. Yes, and as soon as she found out about him, she kicked him out and told you. Cut her some slack, Richard. No one's suggesting you jump straight into bed with her, only share the same house. I can't see Maddie and Tom objecting. Okay, Vicky, I'll get out. I've outstayed my welcome here. I don't know about moving in with Kath and the kids, though. I still remember the way she used my children as a bargaining chip to get a settlement that meant I could hardly live. I know you'll tell me that was the lawyers, but she signed off on it. Get your head out of your butt for a minute. You were in a mess back then. Don't you think she was? The difference is you had us to support you. Rob, your mom and me, all trying to stop you falling apart. Who did she have? Her mom thinks the sun shines out of your butt, so not much support there. The only person offering help and support was the a-hole that caused it all. Richard was shocked. He'd never heard Vicky use such language before. What she said made sense, but it didn't alter how he felt inside. Kath had reacted in a way he hadn't thought possible, and he didn't see how he was going to get past that. Having someone else you can rely on is a great help when you have children. I enjoyed being able to call Richard and ask him to pick them up from school. He would stay with them until I got home, and they would invariably persuade him to stay for dinner. If I was very lucky, I even got a kiss on the cheek when he left. I tried to make him as comfortable as possible, but still there was a barrier between us. When he told me he needed to find somewhere else to live, I never gave him room to doubt what I wanted. Why don't you move in with us? I asked. After all, you are paying the mortgage. There's no sense in paying a landlord when you have a house to live in. I prepared myself for the question I knew was about to come. Where would I sleep? The rooms are all occupied. Look, Richard, if push comes to shove, Tom and Maddie can share a room. I don't want to see you living in some dingy flat when you could live here with us. We'd love to have you. Well, I suppose I could fit most of my stuff into Tom's room, and like you said, I am paying the mortgage. Richard moved back into the house, but it wasn't the solution I'd hoped for. After 4 weeks, we were no nearer sharing a bed. He still went out once or twice a week, often not coming home until the following day. He never said, but it was obvious to me. Someone else was taking care of his needs. We became closer in some ways. We started going out as a family at weekends, and we sat together at the children's school events. An outsider would have thought we were a normal family. My friend Penny congratulated me and asked if we planned to marry again. I broke down in tears as I told her we slept in separate rooms, and I thought he had a girlfriend. Matters weren't helped by Maddie falling out with Tom over a teddy bear. She wanted her room back. I told her Tom couldn't go back to his room because Daddy slept in there. Why can't Daddy sleep in your bed? Then Tom could go back to his own room. It seemed so simple to a child, and a sensible question. However, it was a question I was dreading. Well, sweetheart, Mummy and Daddy aren't married anymore. Only married people are supposed to sleep together. As soon as I said it, I knew I'd laid myself wide open to what came next. You weren't married to Tony, but he slept in your bed? The silence was deafening and seemed to last forever. In reality, then a minute passed. I looked at Richard. It was obvious he'd heard what she had said. He got up, picked up his coat, and headed for the door. I'm just going out for a walk, he said as he put his coat on and left. She must have seen the look of horror on my face because Maddie started to cry. Daddy will come back, won't he, Mummy? Of course he will, darling. I'm sure he will be back for your bedtime story. He was, but only because I delayed bedtime. He seemed calm and left both children drifting off to sleep. I wanted to talk to him, but he went straight to his room and stayed there. That little incident set us back a few weeks. When the blackmail charge was dropped, I thought it would really break him. I was quite grateful because I knew he would have to lie in court. I didn't think Richard could do that. I tried to console him. We could take out private prosecutions in the civil court and take away what funds he had. It wasn't enough for Richard. He wanted to see Anthony banged up in prison. To try to bring him out of his depression, I suggested taking the children swimming at the weekend. Penny and her 2 children came with us. Playing in the water with the children seemed to work wonders. He even started trying to teach Maddie to swim. Penny couldn't take her eyes off of Richard. In the end, I had to pinch her. Hey, that's my husband you're ogling. Don't you mean ex-husband? I'm working on that. Well, you'd better work fast, girl. Once he gets his head together, there is going to be a queue. I'd never thought about it before, but he really did have a hot body. When he went to the main pool to swim for a while, I could see some of the girls checking him out. I turned to Penny. I'm going to fix him, and when I do, he'll be all mine. Anyway, I have a secret weapon. What would that be? Those 2, I said, pointing to the children. As long as I've got them, he won't go far, and I'm going to make sure he never wants to. Well, good luck on that one. I can't understand how you let him get away in the first place. Looking back on it, neither can I. Richard came back to the junior pool and played with the children before saying he would take us all to Pizza Hut for lunch. It was a fitting end to a wonderful morning, and Richard held my hand as we walked out of the mall. That was when I saw a face I hoped I'd never see again. His nose was a bit bent following his last altercation with Richard, but apart from that, it was the same old Tony. He looked surprised at first, then started to smile. Well, I see my cast-offs have found someone to look after them. As I recall, she threw you out, Richard replied. All the charges are dropped. You didn't really think you'd take me down, did you? I'm with my family Woodward. Now step aside and we'll be on our way. My family, he said my family. He included me. I was so pleased that I almost missed Anthony following us out to the car park. What are you going to do now, big man? I'm going to take my family home. Richard continued walking, ushering the children in front of him. I was amazed at his restraint. That's it, walk away. Roll over like you always did. Richard turned to Penny. Penny, would you take the children home, please? Penny hustled the children over to her Isuzu and started buckling them all in. Richard and I walked towards the BMW. Richard got out the key and pressed the unlock button. I heard the chirp, chirp, and saw the lights flash. Then I heard Tony's outburst. That's my car. You a-hole, you stole my car. I heard Tony running towards us as Penny drove away. Richard let go of my hand and turned to face Anthony. Tony's fist connected with the side of Richard's face. He went down and was on his hands and knees when Tony kicked at his stomach. He rolled onto his side and Tony continued kicking him. I pulled out my phone and called the police. I tried to pull Tony away, but he threw me off and I fell to the floor. Richard started to get up. He looked at me and winked. He was still bent over as Tony went to kick him again. For me, it was like seeing it in slow motion. Richard put both hands together as if he was holding a bat. As Tony kicked at him, Richard turned his body away. With all the force he could muster, he swung round, and both his hands crashed into Tony's genitals. He doubled up with both hands between his legs. Richard continued to spin full circle, and his two hands connected with Tony's jaw. He went over and rolled onto his back. Richard staggered over to him and dropped to his knees, one of which came down firmly between Tony's legs. Both men let out a scream. I heard the sirens as Richard pinned Tony to the floor. Between gasps of breath, I could hear Richard speaking to Tony. I think you've just activated your suspended sentence. 3 years, wasn't it? It'll never happen, Tony mumbled. It's your word against mine. Richard nodded in the direction of the mall entrance. Trust me, I don't want you in jail. I want you out here, where I can get my hands on you. But unfortunately, Big Brother is watching. Tony and I looked in the direction Richard had indicated. 10 feet up, above the entrance, was the CCTV camera. You a-hole, you set me up. That camera is going to show an unprovoked assault. He held his ribs. By the feel of things, I've got a couple of broken ribs at least. That makes it aggravated assault occasioning grievous bodily harm. Kath's grazed her arm, so there's another charge. I hope they can fix your jaw. A pretty boy like you will be in great demand where you are going. The police arrived, followed by the ambulance. I told the attending officers that it was an unprovoked attack on both of us and pointed out the CCTV. They asked Richard to get off Tony, but he told them he couldn't do it without help. The paramedics arrived and wanted to examine both men before they moved them. They found Richard had 2 or more broken ribs. They lifted him up, then examined Tony. He had a broken jaw and possible permanent damage to his testicles. Richard and I went in the ambulance, and they called for a second vehicle for Tony. I sat beside Richard's in the ambulance. I put my arm around him but was frightened of hurting him. He just grinned at me. He's going down, Kath. We won't see him again for a few years. I can let Rob have the car back now. Oh, I rather like it. I just wish it was a different color, so that it didn't remind me of him. He squeezed my hand. Better get a respray then. I couldn't help myself. I started to cry. Even breathing caused him to wince with pain. I'm so sorry, Richard. This is all my fault. No, it's not. It's his fault, and now he's going to pay. He was right about most of it. He had 3 broken ribs, a swollen liver, and possible kidney damage. The hospital kept him in for 2 days, then discharged him into my care. They told me he had to have 2 weeks bed rest. Tony was not admitted. They wired his jaw and discharged him into the custody of the police. Rob collected the car and brought it home. After a week, the police called to check out Tony's allegation. I found all Richard's documents and unlocked the car for them to inspect it. After 5 minutes, they returned everything to me and said we had nothing to worry about. I'd insisted Richard use the master bedroom because it had an ensuite bathroom. The first night I slept in his room. After that I slept with him. Yes, we only slept, but to wake up and find him there was like heaven to me. By the end of the 2 weeks he was able to get about and insisted on going back to his own room. However, we were closer. Sadly, as soon as he was well enough he went out for the night and didn't return until the next day. Eva rang a couple of times while Richard was incapacitated. She seemed very worried about him and wanted to visit. He told her that Kathy was looking after him. As soon as he was fit, they fixed a date. Eva was her usual beautiful self, but Richard thought something was wrong. Once they got back to Eva's flat, Richard decided to find out what was wrong. What's wrong, Eva? You've been distant all evening. Have I done something wrong? No, it's me. I have a problem. Well, what is it? Maybe I can help. No, You can't help because you are my problem. I like you, Richard. I like you very much. Too much maybe. All the time I think about you. When I find out you are hurt, I want to look after you, but I can't. You have your children, and you have your wife. I know you cannot leave them. Me, I like my work, I don't want to give it up. Be truthful, Richard. Can you really let your girlfriend be escort girl? I'm sorry, Eva. I don't think I can. If you were my girl, I would want you to be my girl and no one else's. You see, I have problem. I want you to be my man, but I want to continue my work. I know is not fair, but that's what I want and can't have. Sounds like you've thought about this a lot. What conclusion have you come to? I think this is last time for us. The more I see you, the more I want to be with you. I can't do this anymore, Richard. We have to end it today, I'm sorry. They spent the night in tender love, making and parted in the morning. When he did return, he seemed introspective. He seemed sad about something, but didn't want to talk to me about it. I know I was being selfish, but I hoped he had broken it off with his girlfriend. As the weeks went by, it looked like I was right. He certainly wasn't going out anymore. It took almost a month before he could lift the children, but of course a little pain wasn't going to stop him. We were getting on really well by the time Tony's trial came up. Both of us were called as witnesses, as was Penny. We were told by the prosecution counsel that he expected Tony to claim provocation. The CCTV looked pretty conclusive, but there was no sound, so he expected Tony to claim Richard had verbally abused him. Penny was a star, she told it like it was, and wasn't browbeaten by defending counsel. I watched the jurors as she told them about Richard wanting the children out of the way. The defense barrister asked why she thought he had wanted her to do that. It was obvious Mr. Woodward was itching for a fight. Mr. Thompson didn't want them to see their daddy getting hurt, of course. I could almost see the jurors ticking that one off. Good dad and family man. The judge gave Tony 10 years. The suspended sentence made it 13. If he behaved himself, he would be out in 7 years. Richard was relieved. It was almost over. The civil case for damages would take some time, but with Tony in prison, Richard seemed much happier. The lawyer had garnished Tony's accounts, so all money going into the accounts was frozen until the case was heard. Richard and I were getting on really well. No sex, but good friends. We told each other all about our problems and our dreams. Having him there all the time with me burning for him, and he taking no notice caused me a lot of frustration. I got through no end of batteries. He must been able to hear me groaning. When I woke up wanting him, I would walk to his room to sit and watch him sleep. Eventually, I could take it no longer. I lifted the covers and climbed in alongside him. I edged closer to him and reached over to stroke his back. He moved towards me and I kissed his lips. His hand moved across and wrapped around my waist. I kissed him again. He opened his eyes. Kathy, I want you, Richard. I really, really want this. Finally, we made love. I wanted to stay there forever. His arms around me and me lying on his chest. I was drifting off to sleep when I felt him shaking me. Kath, we need to get some sleep and you need to go back to your own room. Come with me. I can't. I'm not ready and it will give the kids the wrong idea. If they find me in your bed, they'll think things are back as they were, and they're not. That hurt. I thought he'd taken me back. Now the feeling of rejection overwhelmed me. I rushed back to my room, threw myself on the bed and cried my eyes out. It took a week to get back to what passed for normal. From then on, we slowly started to make progress and would get round to a bit of snogging on the sofa. Sometimes we got a bit carried away and would end up in my bed. Always he left and went back to his own room. I knew I had to do something drastic, so in February 2012 I put a plan together. On the 29th, I cooked his favorite meal for dinner and put some champagne on ice. With the children were tucked up in bed, I went into the bedroom to prepare. When I returned to Richard, he was sitting on the sofa in the living room. I was wearing only a white silk kimono. I went down on one knee in front of him and took his hand. Richard Thompson, will you marry me? I took him completely by surprise. Is this for real? Aren't you supposed to offer me a ring or something? Please, Richard, please say yes. I want to grow old with you. I want us to bring up our children as man and wife. I don't ever want to lose you again. I dropped my original engagement ring in his hand. I'd had it cleaned and it sparkled like new. I held out my left hand. Well, what's it to be? With my heart in my mouth, waited for a reply that never came. Instead, he took the ring in his right hand and slipped it onto my third finger. I got up and ran to the fridge and got out the champagne. Will you break your rules and have some champers with me? I don't know. Are you trying to trap me? Yes, I'm trying to trap you into living with me for the rest of your life. In that case, I'll have one. Shall we take them upstairs? Sounds good to me, he said as he gave me his glass and swept me up in his arms and carried me up to the master bedroom. That night was special. We were still locked in an embrace when I heard a voice from the doorway. "Mummy, are you and Daddy married now?" Maddie asked. "Not yet, darling, but we will be soon." "Can I be a bridesmaid?" "Of course you can, sweetheart." She ran in and jumped on the bed and snuggled down between us. Tom followed shortly afterwards. Of course, it wasn't as simple as that. We both had issues to deal with. Richard insisted that we both needed counseling. He needed to offload his anger and forgive me for hurting him. I needed to forgive myself for not listening to him and not giving him a chance. It took us about 6 months to be really sure. We were married last August, and yes, Maddie was my bridesmaid. Tony's solicitor has made us an offer. It seems he owned 2 houses that he rented out. The value of the properties is currently falling, and selling is not an option. He offered both houses in full settlement of our claim. Richard will only accept if they pay our legal costs. Richard stuck pretty well to his no alcohol rule. He does occasionally have a beer or a glass of wine, but never more than one. His contract work grew until his old company tried to make him sign an agreement not to work for any of their competitors. When he refused, they offered him his old job back. Richard pointed out that his hourly rate as a contactor was much higher than they were offering. He is now employed at a higher grade than Craig, who used to be his boss. It's been hard convincing Richard's family, but now they see how happy he is. I think they may forgive me. I'm full of hope. I really think we can make it this time. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.